The living room smelled faintly of old furniture polish and disappointment. The same cracked beige walls that had watched her grow up now seemed to lean inward, as if even the house wanted to push her out. She stood in the center of the room with her hands folded tightly in front of her, nails digging into her palms to keep herself steady. She had learned long ago that showing emotion here only made things worse. Her father paced back and forth, his anger heavy and loud, filling every corner. "I don't know where we went wrong with you," he snapped, pointing a shaking finger in her direction. "Other people's children bring pride. You bring excuses." Her mother sat stiffly on the sofa, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. She didn't defend her daughter. She never did. Her silence always hurt more than the shouting. "I tried," the young woman said softly, her voice barely cutting through the air. "I really did." Her father laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Tried? Trying doesn't pay bills. Trying doesn't make you successful. You're useless. A failure who can't even stand on her own feet." Each word landed like a slap. She remembered being a little girl, standing in this same room with a report card in her hands, hoping for a smile that never came. No matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. Someone else was always doing better. Someone else was always worth more. "Look at you," he continued, his voice rising. "No job worth mentioning, no future, no respect. If you think you're such a burden, then get out. Go live in the streets." The words echoed, final and cruel. For a moment, everything inside her cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet break, like glass splintering beneath pressure. She waited for tears, for anger, for the familiar urge to beg them to see her, but nothing came. Instead, she smiled. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't proud. It was tired. A small, calm smile that came from a place deeper than pain. Her father froze, clearly expecting tears or defiance, not silence. "Fine," she said, her voice steady. "I'll go." Her mother finally looked at her then, surprise flickering across her face. "Don't be dramatic," she muttered. "You always do this." The young woman didn't answer. She walked to her room, ignoring the pounding of her heart, and packed a single bag. Clothes she liked. A laptop. Documents. The life she had built quietly, invisibly, right under their roof. As she stepped back into the living room, her father scoffed. "Don't come crawling back." She paused at the door and turned to face them one last time. They saw only the daughter they thought they knew, the disappointment, the failure, the waste of effort. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know she earned $19.5 million a year. They didn't know she owned companies, investments, and a future far beyond these walls. She didn't correct them. She simply smiled again, softer this time, and opened the door. The night air hit her face as she stepped outside, the door slamming shut behind her like the end of a sentence she had never been allowed to finish. She stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the silence wrap around her. Homeless in their eyes. Free in her own. And as she walked away from the only home she had ever known, she made herself a promise. They would learn the truth someday. But not today. The hotel room was quiet in a way her childhood home had never been. No raised voices. No footsteps filled with judgment. Just the soft hum of the city outside the window and the steady rhythm of her own breathing. She stood by the glass, looking down at the glowing streets below, and for the first time since she had walked out, her shoulders finally relaxed. She placed her bag on the bed and sat down slowly, as if her body was only now realizing it was safe. It hurt more than she wanted to admit, not the shouting, not the words, but the fact that leaving had been so easy for them. No one chased after her. No one asked her to stay. The realization cut deep, reopening wounds she had carried since childhood. She remembered being invisible at the dinner table, her opinions brushed aside while others were praised. She remembered bringing home small victories, certificates, projects, quiet accomplishments, and watching them be dismissed with a distracted nod. From a young age, she learned that love in that house was conditional. It had rules. And she never seemed to meet them. So she stopped trying to earn it. She began building something of her own instead. Late nights with her laptop glowing in the dark became her escape. While the house slept, she worked. She studied markets, built ideas, failed, rebuilt, and failed again. Each setback hardened her resolve. Each small success was celebrated silently, alone, with a whispered promise to herself, one day, I'll be free. She never told her parents when her first investment paid off. She never told them when her company scaled faster than she imagined. Their disinterest had taught her an important lesson: success didn't need witnesses to be real. The numbers grew quietly. Opportunities multiplied. Her world expanded far beyond the walls that once made her feel small. And still, she came home each night, playing the role they expected, the struggling daughter, the disappointment, the one who wasn't doing enough. It wasn't deception. It was protection. She leaned back on the bed and closed her eyes, remembering the moment her income crossed $19.5 million a year. There had been no celebration, no applause. Just a long exhale and a deep sense of peace. Proof that she had been right to believe in herself when no one else did. A soft knock came at the door, room service. She almost laughed at the contrast. Go live in the streets, her father had yelled. And here she was, holding a key card to a suite overlooking the city. She ate slowly, savoring the quiet. The anger she expected never arrived. Instead, there was clarity. She didn't want revenge fueled by bitterness. She wanted something gentler. Something truer. She wanted them to see. Not for validation. Not for apologies. But so they would understand the cost of their words. The weight of what they had thrown away without a second thought. 3 weeks, she decided, staring out at the city lights again. 3 weeks would be enough. Enough time for plans to align. Enough time for truth to surface. Enough time for her to finish a chapter of her life she had outgrown. She picked up her phone and began replying to messages, partners, boards, teams who respected her voice and valued her mind. In those spaces, she wasn't a failure. She was a leader. As she prepared for sleep, she whispered one last thought into the silence. They never saw me. But they were about to. 3 weeks later, her parents walked into the grand hall with pride stitched into their posture. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, and the air buzzed with the low murmur of influential voices. This was the kind of event her father respected: wealth, status, power gathered under one roof. He adjusted his jacket, pleased to be here, unaware that every step he took was carrying him closer to the truth. Her mother scanned the room, whispering, "Can you imagine the kind of people who attend something like this?" Neither of them noticed her at first. She stood near the stage, calm and composed, dressed in elegance that didn't scream for attention but commanded it naturally. Confidence settled on her like a second skin. The girl they had thrown out 3 weeks earlier felt like a distant memory, someone she had finally laid to rest. The host stepped forward, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize the visionary behind this entire venture." Her father's expression sharpened with interest. This year's expansion, growth, and record-breaking numbers would not have been possible without her leadership, the host continued. "Please welcome our founder and chief executive." The room fell silent. Her name echoed through the hall. For a split second, her parents didn't react. Then her mother's face drained of color. Her father stiffened, his smile cracking as confusion turned into disbelief. She stepped onto the stage. Applause erupted, loud, sustained, respectful. Investors stood. Partners smiled at her with genuine admiration. Screens behind her displayed achievements, charts climbing upward, numbers that spoke of power and success. $19.5 million annually wasn't spoken aloud, but it pulsed through the room in every approving nod. Her father's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked around, as if expecting someone to correct the mistake. but no one did. She began to speak, her voice steady, confident, unmistakably hers. "Thank you for being here. This journey started quietly, with nothing but belief and persistence. I learned early that you don't need permission to succeed, only courage." Each word landed like a truth long denied. Her parents sat frozen. The daughter they called useless was commanding a room full of people who mattered to them more than anything. The same hands they had dismissed were now shaping futures, funding dreams, leading industries. When she finished, the applause returned, stronger than before. She stepped off the stage and walked past her parents' table. Their eyes followed her, wide, desperate, full of questions they didn't know how to ask. She stopped. Up close, she saw the shock carved deep into their faces. Regret trembled beneath her mother's gaze. Her father finally found his voice. We didn't know." She smiled, the same calm smile she had worn when she left their house. "You never asked," she replied gently. There was no anger in her tone. No accusation. Just truth. She didn't wait for an apology. She didn't wait for excuses. She turned and walked away, greeted instantly by colleagues and friends who valued her presence. Behind her, her parents sat in silence, forced to confront a realization far more painful than punishment. They hadn't lost a failure. They had thrown away a woman who had already won. The night air was crisp as she stepped out of the hall, the sounds of applause still echoing faintly behind her. She could feel the weight of every eye that had just witnessed her success, the reality settling into the minds of those who had doubted her most. Her parents had stayed behind, frozen in a silence that was more telling than any words could ever be. Her father's face had been pale, his pride crumbling under the realization of what they had thrown away. Her mother had clutched her purse, her eyes wide, not with admiration, but with regret that came too late. They had expected a daughter who would return, humbly embarrassed, seeking their approval. Instead, they had been confronted with a woman who had already rewritten her story without them. She didn't seek to humiliate them further. There was no gloating. There was only clarity. She had built her life on her own terms. She had succeeded in spite of their cruelty, in spite of their neglect, and in spite of their disbelief. And now, they finally understood, but understanding was not enough to bring back the years they had wasted. They approached her hesitantly after the event, voices trembling. We were wrong," her father began, his tone unsteady, uncharacteristically small. "We didn't see what you were capable of." Her mother added, we didn't realize," but she couldn't finish the sentence. The words felt hollow, like an apology stretched too thin over the chasm of broken trust. She looked at them, really looked, seeing the people who had shaped her in ways they would never understand. The anger that might have flared in her chest didn't rise. Instead, there was only a deep, unshakable peace. She had survived. She had thrived. She had won the victory that mattered most, her own life. "I know," she said softly. Her voice carried no resentment, only calm certainty. "I always knew who I was, even when you didn't. I didn't need your approval then, and I don't need it now." Her father's lips pressed into a thin line. Her mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. They had expected confrontation, perhaps humiliation, maybe even tears. But she had nothing to give them, no anger, no need for vengeance. She had already claimed what they could never take from her, her dignity. Turning away, she walked down the steps of the hall, her heels clicking softly against the marble. Each step felt lighter than the last, a physical shedding of the weight of their judgment, of years spent proving herself to those who never believed. She wasn't walking away from them in bitterness, she was walking toward her own life, toward opportunities, love, and freedom that no one could ever take away again. She paused at the curb outside, glancing once at the distant glow of the city behind her. It was hers now. Every challenge, every setback, every lonely night she had endured had led her here, to a life she had built without compromise. She smiled, the kind of smile that belonged only to someone who knew her worth. Her parents remained in the hall, powerless, witnessing the daughter they had scorned vanish into her own brilliance. She left not to punish, not to prove, but to live fully, freely, and triumphantly. And as she walked into the night, the stars overhead reflected in her eyes, she whispered to herself, "I left with my dignity. And nothing they say or do can ever take that away." The chapter, and her story, ended not with revenge, but with victory, quiet, sweet, and eternal.